All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and giving us grace as I asked. I appreciate you all. We are so excited here at Trusted to just have this panel discussion, necessary conversations on building the Black trust. I'm your host, Britt Greaves. I've been a nurse for 8 years. I worked in all sorts of specialties, hospice palliative care, CV PICU, as well as the COVID ICU where I founded the Debrief, a safe space for Black healthcare professionals to heal. And then I became the community manager here at Trusted. And for those of you all who don't know, Trusted is a travel nursing company who places nurses in all 50 states. But amongst that, we also have a myriad of resources from our blog, which we have blogs on burnout, finances, and things like that, as well as events like these. We also host group support circles and then advancing your career sessions as well. So yeah, if you're looking for any support on in or outside of bedside, we got you guys covered. As well as we also have a community forum and a Facebook group for nurses to get advice, share their experiences, and then also just make friends outside of work. So we got you guys covered if you guys need us. I'll send all the links and everything at the end of this session with our email and everything like that, so you guys can just connect with us offline. A little bit of housekeeping. I know that this isn't Zoom, so we like to just go over a little bit of the housekeeping on the side here. I did pin a message just in case anyone forgets. There's a general section, so that's where we get to know our fellow attendees today. Say hi, say where you're from. How are you celebrating Black History Month this year? Happy Black History Month, everyone. As well as there's a Q&A section. If you toggle to that, if you toggle to that, you can actually ask your questions there, and we'll have a Q&A section at the end of the chat. So I'll be sure to float those questions to each host. And there's also an upvote. So if you like a question someone else has asked, you can just upvote it and I'll make sure that I get to it. And then as well, there's a DM section. You guys, I'll be manning the chat the entire conversation. So if you guys need to DM me, you're having troubles with your audio or visual or anything like that, you can DM me, or you can also use that help button. And we also have a Bevy support person here to help us as well, just in case, to make sure we got everything covered. So either of those will work, as well as if you're not using Chrome or a desktop, we do suggest those. Those are just a little bit of tools that can kind of help you. And then before, if you enter the event, there was also a place that you could test your audio and visual. We also suggest that just in case, you're not seeing us or hearing us. So those are the big high level things, but on to my favorite part. Let's get to the good stuff. I am so honored to share space with these amazing women that we have on our panel today. Each is such an inspiration, and they are all doing such incredible work in this field. And I'm just so excited. So without further ado, what you guys came here for, not me talking, I will let them introduce themselves because I know that they can do a much better job than me. So we'll start with Ravenne, and then we'll go to JaQuinda and then Tiffany.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. So, as Rich said, my name's Ravenne. I'm from Miami, Florida, but right now I'm a current doctoral student and nurse educator at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philly. My research focuses on the history of nursing, and I specifically focus on Black women in the early 20th century. I'm co-creator of Nurses You Should Know, which is a social media project highlighting the contributions of nurses of color, both past and present. And this project mainly seeks to bridge, the history of nursing, which is all about books and articles and archives, but kind of with technology and this idea of social innovation. And in terms of my clinical background, I was a pediatric cardiac ICU nurse for 3 years, and then I also did some work in home health. But yep, that's me.
Nice. So I am Dr. Jackson. I am a trauma therapist. My clinical work is in trauma work. However, when COVID happened, I shifted to specifically focus on helping professionals. My personal belief is that helping professionals, whether it's a nurse, social worker, doctor, whomever, they are the weavers of the community, and we have nothing if we don't have helping professionals. So I specifically work with helping professionals in order to not only work through like secondary trauma, but also to understanding like your emotional baseline, because oftentimes as a helping professional, we show up and we have to take care of others. But I believe that in order to take care of others, you first have to take care of self. And through my work and I realized that oftentimes the helper comes last. So I do a lot of work around making sure that you are emotionally stable to show up to do your best work.
Everyone, I'm Tiffany Gibson. I am the owner and operator of New Nurse Academy, which started off as an NCLEX prep resource for my clinical nursing students. And now it has grown to be where nurses get new methodologies, new thought, new thinking on how to be emotional intelligent right now. Because as we realize, specifically with the pandemic, that nursing is more than just clinical, right? And in order for us to survive in life, just outside of our careers, we have to have a manage on who we are, have a deeper understanding of self-awareness and how to manage our emotions so we can manage everything else around us. And so while I am a board certified nurse professional development specialist, and I'm also a nurse educator, I spend my time on helping nurses develop themselves as leaders so that wherever they are in their career, they can be their full authentic selves, be change agents, and push the culture of nursing forward. Raven, I had no clue you were in Philly, so hello, I'm in Philly too. I'm also a pediatric nurse by background, worked at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for 10 years in adolescent medicine, and then did some adjunct faculty clinical nurse education work. And now I am a nurse director of a school district out here and doing school health, so yes.
Heavy hitters today, you guys. I know you heard the backgrounds, and this is why I'm so excited. So let's jump right into it. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your stories and how you got into healthcare, what inspired you to pursue nursing or counseling. And let's start off with JaQuinda.
So to be 100% honest, because I'm raw and real, if you haven't noticed that already, I actually did not know what I wanted to go to school for. I tell people all the time, this profession found me. I had an amazing professor because my undergraduate degree is in sociology, and I had a professor who was doing some research, and they were specifically looking at Black and Brown children and how they interact with the educational space. So I fell in love with that, and I took it a step further because a lot of kids that we were doing research on came from low income neighborhoods. So I began to study how that impacts how you show up, how kids show up to do school, and it kind of has branched to me doing trauma work. I'm a helper by nature, and I know that the work that we all do in this space is heavy. So I believe that me giving back is making sure that the helpers are okay. The helpers have resources to combat burnout, secondary trauma, because as we all know, the work is heavy, but the work is needed.
Right.
And if we don't have people to do the work, then, we don't have communities.
Amen. Amen. Tiffany, I know your story is really cool, so I'd love to hear about yours next.
Yes. So my little brother and I are 10 years apart. And my mom was almost 2 weeks past due with him. And my dad went back to work from paternity leave. And that was the day her water broke. And so my mom and I was home, and she was like, call a cab because the baby's coming. And as my dad worked in Manhattan, we lived in the Bronx. So that is a little bit of a commute. And so I went to the hospital, and the nurses were everywhere. I don't remember seeing a doctor. I remember just seeing just nurses, and they were knowledgeable. They were firm. They had on all white. So they had on all white shoes. I still remember that. And they gave me all the snacks. And I was just like, this is so cool. Like, I love this job. You get to deliver babies. You have like access to all the graham crackers and the Shastas. And like, I want to do this. And then so my older cousin had her daughter, and I was there also when her daughter was born. So it was similar experience, but at that point I was 18, and so I was older, and I was able to fully participate in that delivery. And I was all in there, and I say, absolutely, I want to be a nurse. And the doctor wasn't called until it was time to push. The baby was crowning, but the nurse was with my cousin the entire way. And I just thought that that was cool. I always had an interest in human anatomy. Wanted to be a mortician. I did. Wanted to be a mortician. I was very much into human anatomy and bodies and how it works, even at a young age. And my mom said, you would never find a husband being a mortician. And so let me find something else to do. My mom is also a nurse. And so it just felt natural for me to be in a career where I was able to just be a nurturer and a caregiver, but also extremely intelligent. Something I noticed early on was that the nurses knew what they were doing. They were extremely intelligent, and it was just easy for them to be a leader. And so that is what drove me into the profession.
I love it. I love it. Raven, you're still going strong. So I would love to hear about your journey.
Right. I mean, sometimes I'm still trying to figure out like how did you choose nursing? But I think nursing kind of fell into my lap. Honestly, like I was in undergrad and I knew I wanted to work in healthcare, but I didn't. I was just like, I don't know, we'll see. And I had an organic chemistry course and I was in there for 1 week and I was just like, yep, this is not for me. So I was like, I'm leaving. So I honestly was like, what health professional job can I get without organic chemistry? And nursing popped up. So, I saw nursing programs that were like, yeah, you just need these requirements. And I was like, okay, this sounds reasonable. And I was an African American studies major. So I didn't do nursing in my undergrad because I was like, I don't want to be doing clinicals. Like, I want to enjoy myself, like have fun, take courses that I'm interested in. So then I was like, you know what? There's a second degree option to become a nurse. I can do that after I graduate. So that's what I was like, yeah, I'll just do that. It sounded good. And then the only working 3 days a week, I was like, oh, that's even better. So that's kind of how I got into nursing. And I think what kind of like kept me here of like, I like this is that there was so much that I could do. And I like that flexibility just because I knew I get bored with things. So I knew like, if I got bored with this in 2 years, like I can try something else and I can try something else. So I always knew like, you'll have that flexibility to move around and try new things. And I was like, this sounds perfect.
Mm-hmm.
A follow-up question, Raven, since we're already on you, as an underrepresented member in healthcare, what's been your experience in education? Do you feel like there's a disconnect between academia and healthcare? Do you have professors that look like you? Do you feel like, there's a sense of belonging throughout your journey?
Oh, there's a huge disconnect. There is a huge disconnect between academia and healthcare. And I think especially, coming from practicing as a clinical nurse, I think the way we're kind of teaching nursing students, like is very traditional, like you have to do this, like everything is so specific. And I'm like, in clinical practice, there's so like this is not how it is. Like you have to learn to like be a little bit more critical and have more flexibility where I feel like academia is a little bit more structured. Like you got to pass all these skills. And I get it's very skills based, but sometimes I feel like we need to allow students to have that room to like think and see what would happen if this patient didn't look like this case study. What else can we do? In terms of like representation, there's always like one or two Black nurses. So like it's always when I go into academia, and I loved academia because of that. Like I was like, I always identified that one Black nurse that I connected with. She was there to help me, like, let me help you navigate these situations. So I always saw like, you can't leave academia, Raven, even though there's not a lot of you, but you know what it meant to be that one person. You know what that one person meant to you. So I always said like, I wanted to be that one person to another student. Like I can't leave the Black students hanging. So
Representation matters. Tiffany, I know you're in it too. So let's hear from you.
Yes. When I was in nursing school, nursing is actually my second degree. So when I was in nursing school, I wasn't on campus. I wasn't living in the dorms. It literally was like, I'm here to get this degree. I'm in, I'm out, I'm ready to work. So I really didn't pay attention to making connections. I did notice that there wasn't a lot of Black nursing students in my cohort, and I don't remember having a Black professor at all. But in the moment, that didn't deter me, and it wasn't even something that I noticed. Now, on the other side, being an educator, being adjunct faculty and an instructor, there is a disconnect there. A lot of the times I am the Black instructor and my students in the unit that we're on are all white. And so even when I walk onto the unit with my white coat, my lab coat, my credentials behind my name, all the alphabet soup that I have, and I'm still being questioned as to why am I here? And are you the instructor? It's you? Well, who else would it be? And even when it comes to giving feedback to my students, and if I do have a Black student in my cohort, I try to make that connection with them separately and apart, because there is certain just cultural nuances that they need to understand, being a Black person and or a Black woman and man, two separate different things in this profession. And so I really try to help them understand the psychosocial aspects of being a nurse and what they are going to embark upon. I'm also extremely honest and transparent. So if I see microaggressions and I see implicit bias, I call it out, and then I tell my students, so this is just what happened and this is why it happened. And in the future, if you see this, this is what you do. For my white students and my Black students, because white students may say something and not realize that it's offensive. And so just making sure that they understand things like, you want to try to learn someone's name and not just say whatever your name is. That's extremely disrespectful and offensive. You want to take the time out to make sure that this person who does as a first language understand what's going on, and don't think just because you're using the language line that this is taking so much of your time. How do you think they feel when everyone is speaking English around them and they don't understand? So now that I'm on this side and I have the responsibility and the authority, I really do take it upon myself to impress upon these students, like, yes, you're here to pass and you want that A, and you want to, take the test and just become a nurse, but this is going to be a responsibility of yours that you're going to need to understand.
I love that. You guys are just so amazing. I'm so glad we have you. I wish I had a, a teacher like you guys in my life. All right, JaQuinda, in your space, I know there's not a lot of Black therapists out there. So,
So I see both sides, not only as a clinician, but also too as an adjunct professor. I have made this commitment to myself to continue adjuncting, because I didn't have a Black professor until I was in my doctoral program. And for me, especially when we think about like the clinical and like mental health and, all of the makeup and, diversity, looking back, I'm like, there was no diversity like in the staff. So I make it a point to be an adjunct professor, but also to on the clinical aspect and treating patients, how oftentimes I have to debunk the myth, the myth of mental health, and that it's not only for just one type of group of people. Like, your mental health is like, we all have mental health, and you should want to take care of your mental health, and having those conversations with people of color, which I know that I'm able to have because I am a person of color, but I know that there are a lot of people of color who, they struggle to find Black clinicians.
mm-hmm. Oh, that's we're all so glad that you are in this space, because especially in the pandemic, we definitely need more therapists. So let's dive a little bit deeper into these journeys. I'm sure, unfortunately, there are more than one. But can you recall an instance where you had to deal with discrimination, microaggressions, or workplace traumas, and how that shaped your perspective in practice? Will you just tell us about the situation and how you handled it? I know that a lot of times we all deal with it, but we're not sure how to kind of navigate it and go through it once we're experiencing it. So I'd love to hear you all's take on that. Tiffany?
Yes. So surprisingly, I do not recall having a direct discriminatory act on me as a clinical bedside nurse. I'm sure that there has been incidences that were very small that I didn't notice or may have overlooked, but I have definitely witnessed it with other people. And being a charge nurse for a clinical unit on an adolescent unit, there's been plenty of times when I have heard patients and or families say they don't want a Black nurse. And so I now have that responsibility as being the Black one in charge to say, what do I do next? And in every situation, I'm always supporting my nurse. Never once have I said to the patient, absolutely, let me go find somebody else for you. No, I would never do that. I've never done that. But what I will do is support my nurse and say, how do you feel? Do you want to continue to go back into this room? Is this going to mess you up mentally and emotionally for the rest of the shift? If the answer is yes, then I will reassign that nurse, because I don't want to put them in that trauma. But if they can feel like, no, I got it, I'm good, then absolutely. And I'm here to support you, and I will continue to check in. And then what I also do is make sure that the patient and the family understand that you cannot choose staff based on your dislike of the color of their skin. We are all qualified to work here. And that's usually my go-to answer. We're all qualified to work here. We all met the criteria to work here. And it also helped that 75% of the staff on night shift that I worked was all Black. So who's your other option?
What you gonna do?
You didn't really have a lot of other options and choices. But just to make sure that we don't make staffing assignments based on ignorance, we best staffing assignments based on qualifications and acuity of care. And this nurse is very capable of handling this situation. So I've seen it on the other side. And as a professional development specialist, when I worked at another hospital, I was the diversity, equity, and inclusion go-to. And so I would get all the reports coming in and would have to help nurse managers, HR, and legal sift through some of these problems. With a lot of the times, they're not tangible, right? Which is why a lot of discrimination cases are hard to solve per se, because a lot of them are not tangible, something you can see where there's evidence. A lot of it is miscommunication, misinterpretation, it's feeling, it's how something translated over, it's cultural incompetency, it's ignorance. And so it's a lot of talking and managing people's feelings and emotions and their attitudes and beliefs and values, which they grew up with. So to them, this is absolutely normal. I don't understand what the problem is, but helping them understand that this is inappropriate.
Hmm. That's instrumental. Just to start at the base level, regardless. Raven, I know that in specialties, it's super hard, especially in the ICU. So I'd love to hear from you next.
Yeah, surprisingly, which I'm like, I guess this is good to say, like, I don't think I've experienced like direct discrimination either on my unit. Of course, I was only one of 3 Black nurses on the unit. And of course, we all worked night shifts. So I think when take a step back, it's not discrimination toward you, but you question like, why are we all on night shift? But I think we all enjoyed it because we were with each other. So it's like we had our group, we had some little shield of protection. But I actually was thinking, Tiffany, you said something about it's not tangible sometimes. And I was just thinking maybe like last month, and I was like, was that a microaggression that I experienced 2 years ago? Where I remember one night shift, like my patient was sleeping. I'm sitting outside the door. I had one patient paralyzed and sedated, so they're good. Well, good, but and I was reading my book, and then like I'm just reading, like I'm chilling outside the patient's room, and then it's around like 5-6 a.m. and this older white nurse, she probably was there over 20 years, she was like, you're reading a book? And I'm like, yeah, my patient's there, like I'm done with everything. She was like, I think we should clean up around the unit, like wipe everything down. But I'm like, what? The unit's clean. So she's like wiping stuff down, and I go to help her. So I wipe a computer down, and I'm like, Raven, what are you doing? Like, you're not, just go sit at your patient's room. Like, there's nothing to clean. It's already clean. Like, it wasn't even messy. Maybe like 6 months later, one other white nurse, she was like more around my age. She gets this award from the hospital because she started a mini library on our unit. So the nurses can like check out books on the unit if they want to read during their shift. And I don't know why I never put 2 and 2 together, but I was just thinking like, wait, what? So I think when you look back, sometimes you don't put them together, but taking a step back, I was like, that was a little sketchy. But I think even if I did notice it, I don't think I would have said anything to anyone. Like, I think I would have been like, you know what? There's bigger fish to fry. Like, my patient's okay, and just go about my business. But it shouldn't have to be like that.
Yeah, I know working in the ICU, I experienced a couple of instances, but I know that going back to like the basis level of our Black nurses on night shift, how many are on the unit? Are they advancing in their careers? Are they becoming charge nurses? Are they getting ECMO or specialized patients, their assignments and things like that? Those are sometimes the things that happen in ICUs, and also just in the healthcare system in general. Are they even in the ICU? 1 in 3 is when you're 75, 80 people. That's a pretty low statistic. So I know you can probably speak to that as well, JaQuinda, in your specialties. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people say that they don't want to work with me because I am Black. I used to do some consultant work with our family systems here. And a lot of times I was like the last person in regards to making sure like kids could reunify and come back home. So I was the person that, I had to sign off on your paperwork. And unfortunately for for a lot of people, I was the only person. And I just so happened to be a person of color. However, it used to like take me there. Like I would want to like fight it. But ultimately, going back to something that Tiffany said was I started then sitting with them to process through like, so what is it that you, and I would make them name why they wouldn't want to work with me. And a lot of times, of course, it would come down to like experience. But when we would process through it, and I like to call like value checks, like where does this stem from? Like once we would like do that, they could then see like this is rooted in something like how I grew up. And I'm face to face with a woman of color who has all of the degrees and credentials, and now you're faced with somebody who is qualified to do the job, but how you were raised, there's a mismatch. So we process through it like that. um and I've had good experience so far, but I think for me, just making sure that they understand where that comes from, like where that thought, where does that pattern or behavior come from.
Mm, that's awesome. Speaking about your mental and things like that, all of us, a lot of us, let me not say all of us, but a lot of us wrap our identities and our careers like we immediately just say I'm a nurse and that's who we are. I'd love to hear how you guys involve yourself outside of healthcare and fill your cup up regardless of your career and what it is or isn't giving. I know, Tiffany, that you work in self awareness and integration and emotional intelligence. So I'd love for you to touch on that if you could.
Yes, I actually I want to say maybe a couple weeks, couple months ago, had a whole little Instagram series about that. Like, how do you introduce yourself? If someone comes to you and say, "Hey, how are you? Tell me about yourself." Usually, the first 5 sentences that we say are titles in ways that we serve others. I'm a mom. I'm a nurse. I'm a girlfriend. I do this. I do that. And those are all positions and titles and ways that you serve others. But it still doesn't tell me who you are. It still doesn't tell me anything about you. And so I started the practice with calling myself a professional troublemaker, right? So usually I would start my Instagram lives like, "Hey, I'm Tiff, a professional troublemaker," or your educator's favorite educator, or something like that, just to personally disconnect myself to my profession. Because if I change my profession or if I change my title, does that change who I am? It doesn't. I'm still Tiffany. I'm still the girl who cuss a lot. I'm still the girl who drinks rum. I'm still the girl who does all these things, right? Regardless if I'm folding sweaters at the Gap or if I'm saving your life. And so it's really important for me to make sure that the people who I coach and I mentor and I consult with understand themselves, which is why emotional intelligence is so important to me. Self-awareness is so important to me, and just understanding who you were meant to be energetically. I'm really big into human design. I'm really big into divine intelligence and gene keys. So who were you meant to be outside of this? If you like to garden, if you like to walk in the sun, if you like to be barefoot in the grass, who are you? And so I tell my mentees that when they are asked to introduce themselves, to remember that they are the sum of their experiences. Everything that they have gone through in life up until that point makes them who they are at that point: the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. So if you weren't a nurse, does that mean you're less of a person? And if you are a nurse but not working at the bedside, because that's the other thing too, I don't want to leave the bedside because I'm going to lose my skills and I'm not going to be a nurse. It's like, but you are, because your degree says you are. And you are because the NCLEX says you are. Like, why do you need to be attached to a bedside to be a nurse? And so it's a lot of unlearning, a lot of cultural beliefs within nursing that we need to unlearn, societal agreements that, where did they come from, that we need to unlearn, and realize that regardless of where we get our paycheck, we are still who we are.
Hmm. That's good. That's good. I mean, I feel that all the time. I left bedside and I'm still kind of trying to like chip away at that. So I appreciate that. JaQuinda, I know that you work a lot on self-care and burnout. So I'd love to hear that in sense of this question.
Yeah, like just going back off what Tiffany said, like, who are you? And oftentimes, who we are is attached to like our titles. And even within the helping professional, right? I tell people all the time, like, we brag about being tired and we brag about burnout, but there's no reward for that. And at the end of the day, who's suffering? We are. So without what we do, like, who are you? And so I specifically, I developed a tool, like a baseline tool that you use daily, and it's your ability to check in with self, not the nurse self or the clinician, but like check in with self, go back to the foundation, like what defines you and not what society defines. Because oftentimes, when people do talk about their title, people, they bring up like myths, like, do you do this? And you're like, no, because I am a person before I am a practitioner or a clinician. And I think it's very important to know that, which is why I believe that the work is daily, not like when you're burnt out to the max or, you've got written up for the second time, but like doing a daily self check-in, being intentional about checking in with self.
Having those routines are also super vital, those daily routines. All right, Raven, what about you? What can you give us?
Yeah, I think speaking of routines is exactly how I like manage who am I outside of being a nurse? And I always tell people, I'm like, schedule nursing around your life. So what do you need to do for yourself? Like, you want to go to a party, you want to go on vacation, you want to go to a movie, you want to go out, drinks with friends, and then figure out I can work this shift, or like I can take this course for a nursing, certification. Then you do all those things, but you have to like pour into yourself first, enjoy yourself, relax, because a nursing job will always be there. There will always be another shift to pick up. There will always be like another degree or certificate to get, but you have to like take care of yourself. So I would always be, once I clock out like 7:30, I'm out, I'm calling my friends like, what are we doing? Let's hang out. And I was very intentional about that. They would always tell me that at work, like, Raven, you don't have any more PTO. And I'm like, I know, it's okay.
Yes.
I'm going anyways.
Yes.
I'll figure it out.
Yes.
And can I just say something that Raven said? Like, I believe as like helpers, we do a lot of like pouring out, but we are not intentional about being poured into. And I'm liking this conversation because it lets me know that nurses are on it as far as creating these spaces, because if you do a lot of pouring out and you're not getting poured back into, I mean, you burn yourself out. And at the end of the day, you're suffering, your relationships are left to suffer. And it has like a domino effect, but we do so much good work for other people that we have to do good work for ourselves.
Yes.
You cannot pour from an empty cup, period. Speaking a little bit about like healthcare disparities and inequities and things like that, how have you all sustained your career in a broken system? I know that with the George Floyd riots and things like that, there was an insurgence of everything, and we kind of were exposed to a lot of things within our healthcare system, especially the pandemic. So I would love to hear how you guys stay motivated and hopeful as a Black woman within the healthcare system.
Well, for me, business was booming for me during that time because as a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist for healthcare, I was called upon to help, which had its pros and cons. One, it's very reactive, right? And so you're responding and you're reacting to what's happening socially and civilly, and you just want to make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted so nobody comes after you, because a lot of places were being called out or recognized like we have lots of gaps here, and we're not as inclusive as we thought we were. And so some of that was performative reaction, where they wanted somebody to come in, do a couple trainings, do a couple workshops, make sure we're good so we can check off that we did diversity, which I'm like, I am not a task list. I am not something that you put on your annual review. Like, if you're going to do this, we're going to change our culture. So for me, I got busy during that time, and business booms. And the other part of it was identifying that there is a gap in a much wide and appreciated need in nursing on all sides of nursing, from the school side, academic side, the orientation, onboarding side, to the sustainability and growth side, that we do not talk about equity and inclusion enough as we should. We talk about it when there's an incident. We talk about it as it relates to patient care. We do not talk about it as it relates to us internally or intradisciplinary or just as coworkers and peers. We don't talk about it in school. Nursing professors do not know how to integrate this into their curriculum on a day-to-day basis, except for that one chapter in that one textbook that talks about all Jewish people do this and all Hispanic people do this. And I hate that chapter because it's such a stereotype and we're on a monolith. And nursing students really leave nursing school thinking that all Spanish people, when they get upset, they get loud. And it's like, no, that is so not true. There is I have to find this and post it. There is a nursing textbook that literally says, when someone in an African-American family dies, the rest of the family members are going to fall out. And like literally have like, yes, I have to find this. That it's like how they have the box inside the textbook, and it listed all the ethnicities and race on one side, and at the top it said Black African American, and it says, when they experience death, they fall out and have like emotional breaks. And I'm like, no. So whoever's reading this and never had a Black friend or never been around someone who's Black is going to think like how they see it in the movies, where it's perpetuated, where someone is laying across the casket like, take me now, Lord, take me now. No, that is not baseline, not at all. And so it definitely highlighted to me like, all right, Tiff, you need to create some sort of curriculum or guide or series or workshops to help everyone across the board understand, like, there's a difference between diversity, which also is not a synonym for race. Diversity does not equal race. And help them understand that it's equity and inclusion that we are looking for. So to me, during that time, about 2 years ago and onward, moving forward, I have been busy with standing in that gap and making sure like people have the tools and the resources that they need to get themselves together.
So necessary, man. I the education alone is also just profound. So we appreciate that. Raven, how about you?
Yeah, I think so. I have a humanities background, and I think that has really influenced me and what I think, like, what can I do in nursing? And I think with nursing has too much of a narrow perspective of how do we fix health? How do we make people healthy? But when you kind of take a step back from like this biomedical framework, you see like history, sociology, psychology has a lot to teach us in how do we address some of these health issues? How do we interact with patients? And so for me, I found that like investing my skills as a nurse in like community organizations like outside of the hospital. These people are not doctors, they're not nurses, they're like your regular everyday community person, but I can help them say this is what we need to do for our community. So I think for me it's like identifying those spaces in the community and seeing like how can I help them address the community, because I think I had to stop looking for answers right in healthcare. Of course, I'm going to try to help fix it, but it's not going to fix everything. And we can't just focus all of your attention there. So kind of look for those other spaces, like where can I give them my skills? Where can I kind of expand? And I think that kind of helps us see our agency as nurses, because we think like, okay, I can only do this in my 12-hour shift, but nurses can literally do whatever you want. So I think working with organizations, that helps me realize like, oh, I can do this just because I want to. Like I have the license, I have the degree, I have the skills. Like I don't need someone to be giving me a check or saying like, you can clock in, you can do this now. Taking care of patients can happen outside of the hospital or the clinic.
We can do it in tech too.
Literally, and get paid.
Right. All right, JaQuinda.
I got strategic. I realized that there was a gap, especially when COVID first came about. I realized that my patients that I was seeing had trouble putting into words like how they were feeling, because we were all feeling some type of way, but not being able to like verbalize how you feel. So I created these processing groups. I was like, listen, we are not alone. And I really, off of like just a thought, took it and ran with it. And I started doing like virtual like processing groups where people from all over just came, and we talked about what was going on. We talked about what to expect, how it makes us feel, how it affects our relationships. And then when George Floyd murder happened, that brought on a whole other element in regards to racism. And for a lot of people, they realized that the system was broken. Um, but being able to mix people together so that people can get a different perspective. Because the reality of it is that people go home to people who either look like them, who share the same values as them. And for some people, like that's all they know. So their viewpoint is very minimal, but putting people in groups and letting them hear other people how they feel, even if they didn't necessarily participate like right off the bat, but being able to hear like other stories and how like people are really like disenfranchised, and how it not only how it affects them as a human being, but how they view school and work, like kind of open eyes up. So it's very strategic. I'm still going strong with my groups. Um, I'm looking to expand because I believe that there is powerful work in group work. And I believe that it's very important to put people together, not only to heal, but to understand different viewpoints.
Yeah, we were never meant to do it alone. So keep
Not
going.
at all.
So keep going. We've talked about the constant weight that we as Black women carry, or the community. Let's now shift into how we can empower, educate, and improve our community. What resources, professional development courses, and mentorship programs, even if it's your own, are available for Black people in our community in healthcare and nursing, just in the community in general?
So I have two mentorship groups, and they're not specific for Black women or Black people, but I am Black, I'm pro-Black, I'm anti-racist, and so everything I do is going to have that to it first and foremost. I do not code switch in any of my groups. Even when I am doing big organization presentations, I don't code switch, because this is why you hired me, right? And so you're going to get me authentically. What professionalism looks like for you does not mean the same thing for me, which is also a part of the problem. And so in my two groups, one, the Personal Preceptor Club, is for student and new to practice nurses to help them with that psychosocial transition into nursing. I don't care about the clinical part. Like, you're in school, you just graduated school, you can always go on YouTube and find what you need on how to put in an IV, how to put in a Foley. That's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about the psychosocial aspects of what happens when your patient says they want a Black nurse, they don't want a Black nurse. What happens when someone tells you that your hair is inappropriate? I've gotten students to say, like, I'm taking my braids out because I have an interview. Girl, if you don't leave them cornrows in, like, it's stuff like that, where you don't get that conversation in nursing school. One, because all your professors are white. They don't realize this is the conversation you need to have. But two, you don't realize that these are things you don't know until you're in that situation, and then you don't know how to handle that. And so the Personal Preceptor Club is for that psychosocial transition into nursing. And it just so happened that I want to say maybe 2 out of the 35 girls, ladies, not girls, ladies that are in there are not Black. And they're okay with all the Blackness that's in there. And so, because they're still getting fed. My other group is about emotional intelligence via leadership. It's called the Nurse Leader Group. And so that is for more experienced nurses who understand that there's something more than the clinical. And so they too want this psychosocial help and assistance. And also they want to change the culture of their unit on a unit. So they are more they're looking for strategies on how to be a change agent. They realize that things on their unit is not working, it's toxic, something needs to change. They also are not ready to jump ship and be a travel nurse or open up a med spa or do IV hydration, right? Because those are not the answers for everything. Some nurses genuinely want to stay at the bedside and they wanted to continue to have clinical care, but they also know that this environment is not healthy. So what can they do within their power to fix it? And that is my nurse leader group. There are tons of, not in nursing, but just in general, lots of Black women in leadership groups. There's a National Black Nurses Association that helps with specific things like this, and they have chapters in every single state in the United States. So there's different organizations that can help, but not in nursing specifically when it comes to Black nurses. And so that is still a gap, and there's still lots of room for growth in that particular area.
Us ladies are gonna work on that gap. We got this.
Yeah.
But I love the sustainability. That's what you're pretty much teaching, the people who don't want to leave bedside.
Yeah.
Speaking on sustainability, JaQuinda, I know mentally, you got to help. So I'm sure you have some recommendations for development and things.
So I am getting ready to launch my third 10-week course for the helping professionals. And also too, I am a believer in collaboration. I believe that you should have like your work support, but then your like fun support. Like the fun support is like what feeds you, whether it's working out. I recently fell in love with tennis. I'm not great, but I'm cute out there. But also to making sure that there is like a healthy balance to life. And I believe if I see a Black woman, whether she in leadership, whether she is just a new hire and she's on entry level, I'm connecting, I'm supporting in ways that I wish I had early on. And so I believe that it's very important that we continue to do that. Sidebar, I've connected with Tiffany. She's absolutely 100% honest. She don't code switch. What you get, it is what you get. But she is out here doing the work. And yeah, so we've supported each other in that way.
Yes,
And her crew
absolutely.
is definitely fun.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
I told you guys can plug yourself. It's totally fine. All right, and Raven.
Yeah, so I don't have any programs or services because I'm a student. So I'm like, look, I'm fighting
Yes.
for my life.
Yes.
um but no, seriously, like I said earlier, I'm co-creator of Nurses You Should Know, and that is like a social media project. So we post weekly blogs, videos on Instagram, and you can just follow us on Instagram, and it's Nurses You Should Know. And we just highlight stories of nurses of color because a lot of times in nursing, you're not going to see people who look like you, and they're not going to teach you about the nurses who are there because we're there, and we've been there since the beginning of time. So I think just for that, I say for nurses to follow that, just to see that you exist and there's different avenues that you can take. Because a lot of times I know we feel like, well, I don't see anybody in those spaces. Like, I don't know how somebody did that. I don't have this degree, so I can't do that. But like when you read these stories, you see the different pathways that people have taken and all the different things they can do. A lot of the nurses that we've highlighted they're not practicing in nursing. They're in leadership, they're in tech, they're in doing all these other things outside of nursing. So I think that'll be a good, space for inspiration. JaQuinda, you also brought another good point up about fun. So when I started as a nurse, I was living in North Carolina. Like none of my family was there. I was living there by myself. Yeah. But there was a group, it was called Black Professionals of RDU. And I joined that group, and I feel like I was able to establish friendships and relationships with people, your everyday working Black professional. We would just talk about work, and it was good to connect with people like outside of the hospital. And it was just, sometimes I was like, wow, I don't have it that bad. But so it was nice.
Mm-hmm. There's another group I just want to mention real quick. Thank you, Raven, for bringing up like community support or like local support, because Black Nurses Rock is another group too. And so they also they're really big on Facebook, and I know they have chapters in a lot of cities, and they're still growing, but that is another group where it's all about Black nursing, but they are intentional about having fun. I see that they've done cruises, they go on vacations together, they do a lot of social events and things like that, but then they're also there as a great support system. And so that's another resource as well.
Yes, those are all great. I'm from North Carolina, Raven, so I was like,
Oh.
yes, RDU. But yeah, I love all those suggestions. They're great. I definitely agree with just getting out and kind of doing other things, whether it be scrapbooking or playing tennis. Do something else, and it can kind of get you out of your comfort zone, but also out of your own social network and create bigger, wider networks. So I definitely agree with all of those things. If you all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer section. I will get to them. I have one more question and then we'll get to you all's questions. So please feel free to jot those down for me. All right. So what advice would you give your younger self? As a Black nurse, as a Black counselor, what would you tell yourself? Raven, you want to
go? So I think, I'm trying to think. I think as a younger nurse, which I kind of did, and I think it was helpful, but identifying those nurses who were going to be supportive, because as a new nurse, you're working usually in the clinical setting. So I think it was helpful to know at least either 1 to 2 nurses that if I had a question or if I don't know what's going on, I'm going to ask this person. And I know that I don't have to say, like, I was able to say, I don't know what's going on, or I need help understanding this disease process. That really helped me gain like confidence, because they weren't looking at me like, are you stupid? They were just like, it's okay. Like, this is how we're going to work through that. And I think that was really helpful. Another thing was identifying people who can support you outside of clinical. And not one person isn't going to give you everything. So I knew like this person is going to help me in my clinical practice. I knew I wanted to go back to school. This person is going to help me, figure out how to fill out this application. And I was like, I knew I wanted to work per diem and make some more money. This person is going to help me figure that out. So just identify different people who can help you with different things. And use social media. Social media is a great tool. Sometimes it can get a little chaotic, but like everyone's on social media now. Just shoot people a DM. You don't know until you try, like, hey, I have a question about this. If you see someone's in the same area, go on some schools like clinical educators. They have their emails like, hey, I'm interested in your job. Don't be afraid. What the worst they can do is say, no, I can't help you. Or they can say, yes, I'll help you. Let's get on a call.
Absolutely. I like that, Raven. That mentorship is crucial in being an adult. You just need somebody that's going to help you. I heard a quote that said that having a coach is going to help you with your future, and having a therapist is going to help you with your past. So, like, you need both. Yeah, it's like the therapist is going to help you get your past together, but the coach is going to help you with your future. And so you kind of need both. And you're absolutely right. And not one person is going to help you with all aspects of your life. And as to be an effective, functioning adult, you need like maybe like a relationship, go-to person, or a parenting go-to person, or whatever, you have your fitness accountability. For me, the advice I would give to my younger self is to trust my first gut. There was lots of times when I did not trust my first gut because I wanted to follow the status quo, and I wanted to do the steps that I needed to take in order to be seen. And then I took all the steps and still was not seen. Right? I took all the steps and was still turned down for the job. I took all the steps and still was told, you're not ready yet. And I'm like, so what was the point of doing all the steps the way you told me to do it? Like, why did I do it? So it is okay to trust your first gut. And it is okay to sometimes be a renegade. It's a little scary, but there's always a reward in being a renegade. There really is. Like, revolutionaries are revolutionaries for a reason. It only took that one person to do something different in order for them to spark that change that made a ripple effect. And so that would be the advice that I'll tell myself. And I tell myself this now. I still sometimes I'm like, you sure, Tiff? You sure? Trust your gut. It's not going to steer you wrong.
There's a reward in the risk, as they say.
Yes.
JaQuinda?
And I was actually going to say what I would tell my younger self is to take the risk. For so many years, people persuaded me against focusing on trauma therapy, focusing on, like, even when it came for me to do my dissertation, like, I remember my then chair was like, are you sure you want to do trauma work? Are you sure you want to specifically focus on trauma? Like, and it kept asking me, and literally, like, she sent me an email and we had a phone call, and I waited like 6 months to like really give her a solid answer. And at that time it was just like, well, maybe I do need to change it. Like maybe. So I was just so hard on myself. And it's kind of like, look at me now, like in the work that I'm doing, and not and doing it scared, but also too doing it, but knowing that it's needed.
Mhm.
Mm, beautiful. I love all these answers. All right, we got some questions for you guys, and they are good, and I love them. Thank you guys so much for putting these in here. All right, our first question: how do you think the nursing landscape or counseling landscape will change in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of diversity and nurse advocacy?
Mm. It's definitely not going to look the way it looks now, because this particular generation has the balls to speak up and speak loud. And so right now, I think what you're seeing is the beginnings of lots of identifying and addressing issues head on, and doing it publicly. Before, everything was behind the closed doors. We don't want people to know that we have dirty laundry. We want to keep it internal. We don't want to talk about this. It's not good for our reputation. Like and using certain words so that it looks good and you can present it nicely. I think what we're seeing now, especially with the use of social media, is that you cannot hide. And so if something is wrong, someone's going to say something, they're going to say it out loud, and they're going to say it publicly. And so with that being said, how we talk about diversity, discrimination, prejudice is going to look different. And the advocacy around that is going to be a little bit more stronger and strategic, because we would have been doing it all these years up until we get to that point. So I think it's going to be something that becomes a cultural norm to see something, say something, and not be afraid about that.
A revolution, so to speak. It's going to be televised or Instagram.
Yes. Absolutely.
I believe clinically, people are going to advocate for their mental health. Like COVID has shown us how important your mental health is, and holding employees and employers accountable to make sure that mental health is accessible. And I also too think, on the flip side, as providers now are being more innovative in how they provide services, where it used to be like you come in the office and you sit on a chair, where like now, I mean, we can do virtual, and there's difference as far as like data and tech savvy things that we can do that is definitely new to the practice, but I believe it will evolve more.
Raven, do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with what they said. I think too, in terms of education and even being like in this space right now, it's going to take a while, but I think education is like well on its way. Like we have to start talking about these things with our students. Like it's not just oh, that's in clinical practice. Like these are things we have to start talking about with students. And I at least see that in terms of the humanities. Like so many people are now like, what about the history of nursing? Like that's the thing. Like we need to talk about that. And like the amount of emails that I get from these faculty members that are like, can you tell me anything? Like how can I integrate this for my students? And I'm like, what? You don't know anything, but at least it's a site of like people want to change and they want to like improve their courses and how they're teaching students.
Yeah.
All right, our next question. Brown RN here, going through 99% of the situations you mentioned. We're here for you. Thank you for the discussion. It's helpful to know that this is not in my head only. How did you decide it was time to go and build the world you're in now? I love that.
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I'm a natural problem solver. My human design is a manifesting generator. So with that, I am a visionary, and then I also do the work, right? And so for me, it was just like and even when I was on the unit, I was never the nurse that wanted to wait for management to solve the problem. If I saw the gap, then I filled it. That's how I became charge nurse really quickly. That's how I became a preceptor really quickly. I'm not going to wait for someone to save me. I'm an Aries, whatever you want to attribute to me, just something in my spirit that's like, I'm not waiting for no man to take my trash out. Like if the trash is there, I'm gonna take it out. I've always been that girl. Like I've always been that girl. You don't have to open my door. I'm right here. I'm able-bodied. I can open it. So for me, it's like, if there's a problem and I feel like I have a solution, let me see if it works. And so it was when I felt like I had all the academic education that I could get, that I was able to implement that part, but then also start adding in the emotional intelligence part, which is new to nursing, right? So to come up in the nursing world talking about something that's very woo-woo, like emotional intelligence and divine intelligence, it's like, what are you talking about? But because I have the degrees and the education to back up some of that stuff with evidence-based research and things of that nature, it's like, oh. So it's being strategic with my problem solving, but also for me, just knowing, like, here's an issue and you have a answer, just go ahead and answer it, solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. I say trust your gut. I know for me, I knew a long time ago I was supposed to start my private practice, but I waited because I was scared. And what ended up happening, the unit that I worked in got phased out, and they were like trying to move people around. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm just gonna get out here and just start my private practice. But I knew a long time ago I should have done it, and I waited. So I say trust your gut. And if you have the vision, connect with people, reach out to people. Like Raven said, social media is a great platform to use, because my first big contract literally came because I DM'd a girl, and I was like, she's not gonna read it. But I DM'd her, and like the following morning, like, she's like, hey, like, my boss wants to meet with you. And so shoot your shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I was a planner. So I came into nursing like, okay, I'm going to be a nurse, but I had these big ideas like, I'm going to be a nurse who's going to do all these things. So a lot of times when I was figuring out, like, do I want to leave or do I stay? I had to look at my big goals and figure out, is this contributing to like my big goal? And if it's not, it's okay to say, all right, it's time to go. Like, I need to do something else that's going to get me to this big goal that I have. And I think a lot of times when we're deciding, especially as a new nurse, we're a little uncomfortable because it's new. You know, we're not as confident either in like our education or skills. So you have to first assess, like, do I want to go because I'm just uncomfortable and I'm not confident yet? I'm not, you know, like sturdy in my skills or what I know, and or like time management. Assess that first. Because if it's that, like, that's something else. That doesn't mean you're ready to go. Don't leave just because you're uncomfortable. Like, you got to figure out how to fix that first. But if it's like, no, I'm confident in what I'm doing, like, I think I can be doing more, then just go. Just identify, like, I'm going to leave and try this.
I will say too, I definitely waited too late. I was burnt out of bedside, and I waited too late to go, and it was a detriment. So I think, as JaQuinda said, you'll know, one, but also believe in yourself and know in yourself. I think oftentimes as Black women, we have imposter syndrome. We have all these other things that come before it, and we put other things before it. And as we all spoke to before, like self-care, is this serving you anymore? And that's what I had to ask myself. The place I was at wasn't serving me anymore, and I wasn't living in my purpose. And you never want to live on this earth and not live in your purpose. So if you already have that feeling of, you know, it's time to go potentially, I think that that's usually an inkling, like, okay, I need to start planning, I need to start assessing, and I need to move, you know what I mean, in your power. So also just believe in yourself. The next question we have is, what is your advice to nurses of color who have experienced being ostracized or rejected for making mistakes, but feeling singled out since there aren't people who look like you on your unit or workplace? What's the best way to not let this experience affect your confidence?
That's another really good question too. So this is where your mentors and your coaches come into place, because this is something that you are going to need to process out loud with someone, and to have someone help you navigate with what to do next, right? And so help you with, how do you go up the chain of command to, you know, to talk about this, because you should be able to go to your HR business partner to say, you know, I made a mistake and Susie made a mistake and we made the same mistake. But Susie, you know, was told this was a learning experience and I got to write up, you know, so can you help me understand the difference between both of us, you know, giving the wrong medication to a patient. And while one was considered a learning experience and the other one was considered, a discipline offense. And being really objective, just like that, not how it makes me feel, but really being objective to say, like, can you help me understand what the difference is in these two very similar situations and cases? But it's really going to take some time for you to get through that, because your emotions are real, and you're not going to be able to cognitively do your work confidently if your emotions are driving the bus. And so you have to get your emotions under control, however that looks like, whatever that looks like. And also, if there's somebody trusted at your job that you can go to say, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. And, is it me looking at it through my distorted lens why this doesn't feel right? Or is this something actually there? And you may not find that trusted person at your job, but again, that's where that coach comes into place, maybe your therapist or that third non-biased party. I'm looking at the question again just to make sure that I understand. Being ostracized and feeling rejected, that's traumatizing. I have had feelings of being ostracized by a group of people that I really wanted to impress and be a part of that in group. And when you don't get that stamp of approval, you feel like such a failure. And then everything you do after that feels like it doesn't matter, right? Because you didn't get that initial approval that you want. And it took time. It took lots of time and processing for me to get over it. But does that affect your ability to be a nurse? Did it affect your skills? Was this definitely something that you can improve upon? So that's kind of where my thoughts are with that.
Yeah, I think one thing, like when I was a nurse and I made plenty of mistakes, or like, who shouldn't have done that, or I could have done that differently. And people would, I know what it's like. Those nurses come in like, did you do this? Or like, you didn't do this. And a lot of times I'm like, okay, Raven, like they notice that you made a mistake. And a lot of times the way some nurses approach you, it just, they're reflecting their own insecurities on you. So I think sometimes you have to acknowledge that, like, this person is just, whew, like, take a deep breath, like they're reflecting something that's going on within themselves. But I would always flip it back on them sometimes, like, oh, what should I do next time? Or how would you have done this in your situation? Because that kind of lets you figure out who is there to help you versus who is there just to reject you. Because if someone really wants to help you, they'll say, oh, next time you should do this, X, Y, and Z. Okay, why would you do it that way instead of this way? Make it into a learning opportunity. Because then if they're like, don't ask me that, now like, why are you being like that? So then also when you go up that chain of command, like, who told you made a mistake? Like, oh, this person told me they made a mistake and this is how they responded to me. So that's how we kind of let people create their own mess for themselves. And kind of like, don't take it personal. I know it's easier said than done, but that was just one way that would kind of help me do that.
So my go-to is, I always say, address the blockage, meaning like address your feelings, because your feelings are your feelings. And if you are coming from a place like in your feelings, and that's going to drive how you see the situation, how you respond to the situation. And even if you are asking somebody for feedback, like if you're in your feelings, it's going to impact how you receive feedback. So I say address your feelings. I'm going to say a therapist or a coach, a non-biased person to like process through, but can also to bring in a different perspective, but also to like calm you down, settle you down, so that you can not only receive it, but can see the situation for what it is. And then I say make noise. Like if it's a HR issue, then you go to your HR and have the conversation. Like follow the chain of command, but making sure that you have these conversations so that it doesn't further impact your work.
I love them all. I love them all. Ladies, this has been just so wonderful. I hope that everyone out there has really enjoyed this time. I will be sure to link their information, but I would love for them to each call it out where you would like everyone to follow you or find you if they want to get mentorship, if they want to get therapy, your Nurses You Should Know platform. I would love for you guys to just go around, kind of shoot out your handles and things like that. But don't worry if you miss it. I will be sure to link them in the email, so you will have them as well. Either one of you.
Yeah, you can. Let me see. My Instagram is Hey Nurse Ray, and Ray is spelled RAE. Sometimes I'm on there. Honestly, I haven't been on Instagram in a while. But then our Nurses You Should Know platform is on medium.com/nurses you should know. And then we're also on Instagram as Nurses You Should Know.
Mm-hmm.
I am Dr. JaQuinda Jackson on Instagram. I'm always on Instagram. Um, and then trauma therapist on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. And I am New Nurse Academy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Instagram is where I spend majority of my time. And on LinkedIn, I'm Tiffany E. Gibson.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Britt, I'll give Britt my email. It's araven@gmail.com. But so if anyone's interested in like PhD, doctoral education, I know what it was like applying and feeling like what is going on. No one really explained to me what the PhD program is like. So if anyone is interested, just has any questions, please, please, please reach out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys so much again. Thank you all for attending tonight. This recording will be sent out shortly, but also I would just love if you guys could give us any feedback that you have on how we can get better, on what you loved about it, and what more events we could have like this. If you have any topics that you're interested in, we would love to hear. The way that we get better is through you all, so I would greatly appreciate that. And then again, thank you so much to our hosts tonight. We are just so appreciative of you and all your knowledge and expertise. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Black History Month and a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Bye.